Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Dennis Heil, and I am diagnosed with type 2 bipolar disorder with severe depression and high functioning autism. I've been living with bipolar disorder for over 30 years, 15 of which I spent undiagnosed. In 2009, I experienced a depressive psychotic break that led to my diagnosis of type 2 bipolar disorder. I would be diagnosed with autism a few years later. In my podcast, Bluntly Bipolar, I'm going to share with you my experiences and the hard lessons I've learned trying to find some peace and happiness in my life. I hope that by sharing my experiences, others can avoid learning these lessons the hard way. I'm not a mental health professional. All I am is a mental patient with a microphone. Listener discretion is advised. Early in my life, I realized something was off about the way I related to people, and it scared me. For a long time, I thought I was a sociopath. I could look at someone crying or suffering and not feel hardly anything. I constantly had other people asking me questions like, well, how would you feel if you were in that situation? Or what if someone treated you that way? But most often my answer was I wouldn't feel much of anything. And I thought that meant I had no empathy, but I was wrong. Because the psych who diagnosed me as being on the autistic spectrum informed me I'm actually a low empathy person, not no empathy. And that was further complicated with the severity of my bipolar disorder and depression. But what's the difference between low empathy and no empathy? Well, sometimes I will get a spark of recognition or I'll intellectually identify situations where I know I should feel bad. And if I do that, I can dip into my past experiences to find some feelings about the situation. Though I don't know if I've ever had the full depth of those emotions that other people experience. I was also told that people with no empathy generally don't recognize that they're missing something. Their brain just doesn't work that way, so it never occurs to them that something is wrong. They just assume that everyone else is like them, and they act accordingly. The way my autism took a wrecking ball to my social processes can be hard for other people to see unless I point them out. They make it difficult for me to feel close and connected to people, even the people that are the most dear to me. And my bipolar depression set in when I was about 13, and I wasn't diagnosed with bipolar disorder until 29, and autism not for a few years after that. Prior to that, I spent a lot of time feeling alone and isolated, longing for connection, even though I was fortunate to have people around me that cared, and a few good friends too. I've always felt like I was sitting in a room, watching the world through a closed window, and the closest I can get is touching the glass. That barrier is always there. And as far as I can tell, I don't get the mental benefits of socialization that neurotypical people do. The brain is supposed to fire off the happy chemicals when socializing, but I don't think my brain does that. Never seemed like it did anyway. And unfortunately, I was not emotionally or socially intelligent enough to understand how to manage what was going on in my head. And I spent a lot of time alone on the computer, swimming in the sewers of the internet like 4chan, Encyclopedia Dramatica, Reddit, and MIRC channels for you old fogies out there. I was the target demographic for the alt-right white Christian nationalist pipeline, and I think it would have sucked me in deeper had it not been for Tupac Shakur. All the time I spent suicidal in my teenage years and 20s when my mind was pitch black, when I couldn't feel much because my depression was so bad, I would put on his music because I could actually feel something familiar in his passionate words and expression. But I'm not black, and I didn't grow up in those environments. I'm a straight white man that comes from a working class background in conservative, rural-ish area. Even though the stories he told weren't my experiences, I could still remember relating so much to the anger and the hopelessness he'd expressed in songs like Only Fear of Death or Troublesome 96, because there ain't nothing worse than this cursed ass hopeless life. It was the only flicker of light that sparked in the pitch black of my brain, and it kept me from going over the edge dozens of times. Only recently, while thinking about and writing this script, did I finally realize that the only reason I am still alive is because of the struggle for Black liberation. I know that I would have made many more suicide attempts had it not been for his music and words. But when I found myself swimming in the sewers of the internet, I related to a lot of the people I crossed paths with. Social misfits and social outcasts, people that didn't fit in, people that were struggling like I was. Looking back, it's so clear to me how much mental illness and trauma was in those communities. They didn't make me feel like an outsider, even though I still didn't feel close to anyone. So when the racist and sexist jokes would pop up, I'd join and make them too. They're just jokes after all. Why are you being so serious about it? It's not that deep, bro. Right? Well, no. I couldn't see the spirit or intent because of my social dysfunction. Sure, racial humor can be funny, but it has to be the right context. Yeah, movies like Tropic Thunder and Blazing Saddles that utilize racial humor, but it's not at the expense of the people that aren't white. And as I deconstructed, I realized that was a big disconnect that hateful people use as a smokescreen. That's what the excuses of, it's not that deep, bro, are for. It gives them plausible deniability to hide behind. Because the spirit and intent behind the jokes was not for humor, satire, or social commentary. It stops being satire or social commentary when it's just done at the expense of those folks. But over the years I was participating in that, I had this nagging feeling that something was off. And that was my low empathy shooting off a flare, trying to tell me something was wrong. And I ignored it, because that fake feeling of social connection mattered more to me at the time. At the same time, I was listening to artists like Tupac speak about the struggle, poverty, and what it was like to be a black man in America. And while I couldn't relate to their words from a personal experience, I could relate to the emotions. My mental illness caused me to feel similar ways: hopeless, empty, angry, wondering if I'm just better off dead. That emotional anchor kept me from slipping into the abyss. And there's this common narrative that was often repeated by establishment politicians that rap was the glorification of violence, poverty, and bad behavior. Yeah, some of it was. But on the other hand, a whole lot of it was not glorification. It was social commentary. It was saying we have no jobs, we have no money, our kids are dying, and the establishment does not care. Not only does it not care, but it is actively and maliciously harming us. Like with the CIA's involvement with cocaine trafficking or Nixon criminalizing pot so the government could target hippies and black rights civil activists. There were several talking points that would make the rounds in those communities when trashing minorities. And one of those talking points was that minorities, women and queers, felt they were better than people like me, a straight white man. And they still push that narrative, like when J.D. Vance said, "You don't have to apologize for being white anymore." Now, I've been alive for 46 years, and I have never, not once, had any person of color ask for or expect an apology for my whiteness. The only people I have ever heard anything like that from are other white people. But then, in that context, it makes sense because those apologies are just performative. They don't mean anything because they don't change the systems that brought us to where we are. I would never and will never apologize for being white, just as I would never apologize for being mentally ill. It's performative at best and malicious at worst. It's malicious because it's seeking to put the emotional labor and resolution on the people who have been actively harmed by other people with my skin color, and whatever harm I inadvertently caused myself. But then you have the narrative from white supremacists that all these other groups think they're better than straight white men. That's why they need their pride months and awareness campaigns, history months, and all this special attention. They don't take pride in being an American, not like us God-fearing patriots. And that's why they demand respect. That's why they demand you kiss their asses. What about your history, white boy? Where's your Pride Month, white boy? Or are you a man? Are you proud to be white like they're proud to be black or Hispanic or Asian or gay or trans or a woman? Are you proud of this Western civilization that we've built that those people are ruining by changing things? And so it's easy for someone like me to think, hell yeah, fuck those people. But wait, that thing in the back of my head, something is off. In June of 1969, a series of protests and riots erupted after the police raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar located in New York City. This raid was part of a coordinated effort to harass LGBTQ people. The Stonewall Inn raid sparked spontaneous protests that lasted the next 6 nights. It spurred the beginning of a more cohesive, organized activism from LGBTQ people to create spaces where they could just exist in peace and safety. The cops raided the place because it was a gay bar. It was part of targeted harassment. A year later, on the first anniversary, peaceful demonstrations happened around America in commemoration of that event, and that eventually became Gay Pride. However, the LGBTQ community took inspiration from another community expressing pride in the 60s, and that was the Black community. And Black Pride was a response to white racism in the context of everything that they had been through in this country and the hostility that was levied at the 1960s civil rights movement. The ideas behind Black Pride and Black excellence were to counter society's racist narratives. And a few of the movement's major goals were pushing for things like better representation, acceptance, and the ability to exist without harassment. The pride movements are not uppity minorities thinking that they are better than people like me. And I had no idea how much that perspective was shaping my opinions. The whole point is to create anger and defensiveness by manipulation through the use of the word respect. So let's turn to the Merriam-Webster dictionary for a moment, because respect has multiple definitions and uses, but the first two are the relevant ones. The first definition of respect is a feeling or understanding that someone or something is important, serious, etc., and they deserve the appropriate treatment or regard. That seems reasonable. Everyone deserves to be treated with regard, that is, with their basic humanity acknowledged. The second definition is high or special regard. Okay, so that's like looking up to and admiring someone. That kind of respect is something that needs to be earned through action typically. We hold people in high or special regard that do impressive things, and that's also reasonable in my eyes. But context changes the way a target demographic interprets words. So consider Bill. Bill is a white construction worker. He loves his Hispanic coworkers. He treats everyone with that basic level of respect, definition number one. So when he hears a message like, "We demand respect," he doesn't know the full context of where that statement is coming from. Instead, he interprets it through the second definition, a demand to be held in high regard, because he doesn't go out of his way to treat anyone disrespectfully. He's not aware of the full context because the system does not educate us about this stuff. If you're white, you have to go out of your way to learn about it. Instead, Bill hears pride as a demand to elevate these other groups over himself at his expense, and that pisses him off. You can't demand that I hold you in high esteem. Fuck you. How many times have you heard a white person say, "Respect is earned, not given"? Because I don't know about you, but in my life, it's been a lot. Except that's not an accurate statement either, because it's actually both. The first definition, a basic level of consideration of one's humanity, should be given to everyone. The second definition, to hold someone in high esteem, that's something that's earned. But different audiences are going to hear that statement about respect differently through their own cultural and personal context. Now, as someone who did shady work in marketing, one of the most effective ways to persuade someone is to deliver them curated information that allows them to come to the conclusion themselves. The most effective way to do that is by leaving out important context. In this case, have you ever once heard anyone who pushing that message acknowledge why pride even exists in the first place? No, you haven't, because if you did, then you might see it as reasonable. The pride movements and awareness campaigns are calling attention to the fact that our society does not treat everyone fairly. They're saying, "I am allowed to exist and I will not be ashamed, hide, or go away just because you're uncomfortable. You need to adapt because we deserve the same rights, considerations, and space as a straight white man." And the same thing is true of Black Lives Matter. No reasonable person was saying that other lives didn't matter, but All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter were created to derail that conversation. Consider Ahmaud Arbery. In 2020, Arbery, a black man out jogging, was chased down by three racists. They claimed he looked suspicious, which is racist doublespeak for he was existing while black. Plausible deniability is an essential tool for racists when they're not among friends. It's how they find each other. Say something questionable, see who looks uncomfortable and who doesn't, who laughs and doesn't, and they can find their people. Now, one of Arbery's assailants was on a first-name basis with the police, so no one bothered to investigate when he claimed he was defending himself. In truth, it was Arbery who acted in self-defense when he tried to take a gun from one of the racists pointed at him, and he was shot in the process. Then, the police were told multiple times to not bother pursuing charges by the local district attorney. Then you have gay pride and trans pride. They push the narrative that gay or trans people are just predators trying to go unnoticed, trying to get closer to women and children, which makes no sense with even the flimsiest of examinations. Why would anyone choose to be gay or trans with the way our society treats queer people? Yeah, let me choose to be someone that a significant number of people in society loudly hate. Not no rocket surgeon, but I'm pretty sure a disguise is supposed to make you harder to notice, not make you stand out more. The only way that narrative makes sense is when you understand that it's just performative. If they genuinely cared about the safety of women and children, we'd have better gun laws, we'd have fully funded child protective services, we'd have more domestic violence shelters, and we'd have better mental health funding. And you may be thinking, but what about men and boys that are victimized? Yeah, men too. But it's different. The difference is that propagandists claim they want to protect women and children. They do not make that claim for men. You're just on your own. Go fuck yourself. Now, the ironic part is that they're not actually keeping trans women out of bathrooms, not the ones that can pass for women anyway. Instead, the people who are actually affected by it are trans women that can't pass and biological women who don't have a traditionally feminine look. But yeah, they're totally protecting women and children by doing basically nothing, which is par for the course for America. America loves its performative strengths. Then you have DEI, where they're prioritizing giving jobs to minorities over more qualified white men. And I specifically said white men because white women, you're a minority too. One of the biggest lies white men have convinced white women of is that they value and respect them for their subservience. They do not. They're no different than other white men who don't have the same level of power and wealth. You're just an expendable tool to be used and discarded when you're no longer useful. You know, like what America does to its most hallowed heroes, veterans. Abolishing DEI isn't about leveling the playing field for white men. It's about making it so no one is paying attention when they delete the resume of Maria Gonzalez or LaShawn Jackson in favor of Brad Miller. It's about denying legal footing for finding a reason to fire a woman who needs maternal leave or just not hiring her because she could possibly get pregnant in the future. It's not about fairness and equality. It's about power, control, and money, as it's always been. Hell, look at what's going on with the Mexicans and deportation. Did you know this isn't even the first time America has done a mass deportation of Mexicans? There was an era called the Mexican repatriation that ran from about 1929 to 1939, in which our illustrious government deported up to 2 million Mexicans back to Mexico. Except about half of them were actually American citizens, and many of them were kids. And much of that was driven by the Great Depression and racism. They're taking our jobs. Sound familiar? Their ideology is crafted and wielded to keep men like me angry. Why? Because anger makes people easier to control. It makes them predictable. It also shuts down your critical thinking skills unless you stay aware of it. And a good example includes the propaganda surrounding moderate deportation and how many white people acted surprised when they started detaining kids and average people. They're going to go after the criminals. Okay, technically that's true. They did go after the criminals, people that overstayed visas, which is breaking the law, which technically makes them a criminal. It's another example of weaponized doublespeak, like the way they weaponize respect. Now, I know for me, when I'm angry, I struggle to empathize with other people even more. I tend to not listen as closely as I could, and I miss important details that could potentially change the context of a situation. Plus, the anger feels amazing when it's validated. Anger is one of the best drugs, particularly when you're depressed, because it feels so energetic and alive. And they have a vested interest in keeping men like me angry in the same way that a drug dealer has a vested interest in the addiction of his customers. Can't find a good paying job? Here's your fix. It's the goddamn foreigners. But what's kind of ironic is I've met more than a few ethical drug dealers. You know, people that cared about the people around them. Now, personally, I'm too easy to manipulate when I'm angry and self-righteous. I also find that I tend to impose my own worldview and life experiences on other people when I'm angry. I'm more judgmental than I normally would be because I'm coming from a place of my own hurt or life experiences, and that makes me defensive and combative. Because what the fuck do you mean I have white privilege? My life with mental illness and working garbage jobs hasn't been fucking privilege. What privilege do I have? Well, I have the privilege to jog through a neighborhood without someone claiming I'm suspicious and essentially lynching me because of the color of my skin, for one. And if I weren't severely mentally ill, I would also have the privilege to try to ignore all of this because it more than likely wouldn't affect me. Though, with Brian Kilmeade of Fox News suggesting we should just euthanize the mentally ill homeless who refuse treatment, and RFK Jr. talking about databases and camps, I'm not entirely liking my chances either. We mentally ill people tend to not fare so well under fascism because we're a drain on society. And if you recall, the Christian nationalists were more than happy to sacrifice the disabled and elderly to save the economy during COVID. And anyone that's ever dealt with the system and its lack of capabilities and services should know they certainly don't want to spend money on the mentally ill. No, we are just a drain. Now, personally, I feel like I started making the most progress when I stopped imposing my life experiences and reality on other people. You don't have to judge what you hear. You can just listen. You can just receive. That doesn't mean you have to believe everything you hear, but if you listen enough, you'll start seeing the same patterns coming from entirely different, unconnected people. And as I look back and reflect on my decades living with bipolar disorder, depression, and anger, I realized that it did make me strong. Instead, it shut down my critical thinking. It made me easier to influence. It created loneliness, greater isolation, and hostility, which manipulative people took advantage of. After progress in therapy and deconstructing my anger, I realized that peace and joy cannot live in a brain that's drowning in anger. Anger is just a treadmill that made me exhausted, vulnerable, and easy to control. The only people that benefit from my anger are the people who weaponized it. Thank you for spending your time with me. Hit subscribe and share this with someone you think it might help.